Patch 14.10 was the start of Rank Split 2, and it was some of the most unbalanced, chaotic League of Legends ever. We're now on 14.11, which balanced a lot of things, but it's still a mess. Here's my 14.11 support solo queue tier list. Enchanters felt terrible to play in 14.10 because everything was getting one shot and Night's Vow was OP, but they are back in this patch. Most mage supports are pretty mid tier now, and I think it's going to stay that way because Riot explicitly said they didn't want carries like that in their support role. Overall, I think there's a lot of variety in the high tier with Enchanters, Hook, and Engage champs all being really strong. This tier list, I'm going to cover specific champs that I want to talk about, but before I do, let's talk about some of the new runes and items that were introduced in this split. First Strike was changed in 14.10, where you get higher gold gains but deal less damage, which can be abused heavily by long range supports. It's less about the damage and more about the gold, as it can accelerate your build and snowball the game harder than any keystone can and opens up support items that were once too expensive to build. First Strike brings back some mages in the meta because of how hard they can abuse this rune. For some champions, this is the best in slot, but for others, it really depends on the matchup and how often they can strike first. Cashback is a new rune in the inspiration tree that replaced Futures Market. You get 6% gold back on a legendary item, and if you do the math, this rune unfortunately really sucks. Most support items are around 2200 to 2300 gold, so if you do the math, you get about 132 to 138 gold back on a purchase. Cashback is in the same row as magical footwear, and free boots will give you 300 gold value. So for cashback to be as valuable as magical footwear, you need to buy 3 items, which won't be until way later in the game if you can even build 3 items, whereas magical footwear gets you that value at 12 minutes or less. Cashback is not a good rune for supports unless you're running First Strike and building non-support items. Jack of all trades was another inspiration rune that was introduced to the same row of Cosmic Insight and Approach Velocity. You earn 1 ability haste per unique stat from items, and at 5 stacks you get 10 adaptive force, and at 10 stacks you get 25 adaptive force. Jack of all trades is a great rune for supports because you can get 5 unique stats very early. World Atlas gives you health regen, and mana regen, so you're already at 3 stacks on your first item, and on your first back you can get cheap components to hit 5 unique stacks to get 10 adaptive force. The early stats are nice, but I don't think you will ever or should try to build items to get to the 10 unique stacks because it's not worth it to grief your build to get the 25 adaptive force. I'm also not too sold on the early adaptive force being more worth it than Cosmic Insight. I think Jack of all trades needs a bit more buffs or a lower threshold for the 10 unique stats to be worth it. Dawncore got a huge change in 14.10 where you no longer have Summoner Spell and Ability Haste, but it received increased heal and shield power and more AP. It's one of the best enchanter items, but it's still too expensive at 2700 gold. Luckily, First Strike opens up the build path to be able to realistically afford this item. As someone that plays a lot of enchanters, I truly feel like Dawncore is not worth building unless you have First Strike with free boots or you happen to be very ahead. Echoes of Helia had some of its numbers adjusted in 14.10, and now it's one of the most broken items. It had its max stacks cut, but each individual stack does more damage and heals more. Numbers on Helia are just not balanced, and if you play champions that can utilize the item to its fullest, like Janna, Sona, or Milio, you'll understand what I mean. The shards don't scale, so if you are going to build Helia, build it as a first item. Symbiotic Soles are the new boots that were introduced in 14.10, and it pretty much just replaced Boots of Mobility. It's pretty mediocre and is only built on supports that used to run Mobies such as Thresh and Pyke. It honestly had a lot of hype built around it when it was first revealed, but falls pretty short due to so many other good boot options. Moving on to champions now, Soraka has been struggling a lot due to one-shot meta and the introduction of Faded Ashes. The best application for healing reduction comes from champions that have damage over time abilities because of how long it can extend the grievous wounds. Leandri's used to be the best spike to apply the healing reduction, but now you can do that for only 900 gold. It also does not help that a lot of AP junglers are super meta, so Soraka has a really hard time. Xerath and Karma are both one of the best supports that can abuse First Strike really well due to their range. They aren't good into hook champs, but they have very favorable matchups into enchanters and engage supports because they can farm First Strike on cooldown. I think any support that can do this can have the old mage playstyle where they can snowball a lane and take over game with the extra gold. I think a lot of people aren't playing Xerath and Karma, but they have a lot of potential with First Strike. Lulu and Milio are both in great spots, with Milio being able to utilize Helia well and Lulu recently getting some nice buffs in 14.11. I see them both being really similar champions in that they should be picked with 1 or 2 auto attack hyper carries, but just in different scenarios. Lulu is a better pick for peeling off assassins, while Milio is a better pick into teams that have heavy CC. They both excel in the right team comp and feel pretty similar in strength. Sona has a lot going for her because she's the best user of Helia and she can use First Strike well into low range matchups. I think she's the strongest she has ever been, and if she does get a favorable matchup for First Strike, she can easily snowball and solo carry games a lot faster. If she is able to complete Dawncore, she is literally Exodia. Sona is really strong, but I don't have her in S because she can get hard countered by a lot of the meta hook champs. Braum and Taric feel very similar to Milio and Lulu in that they need the right conditions to really pop off. I think the main difference between Braum Taric and Milio Lulu is that Braum Braum Taric will hard win the matchups they excel in. On the flip side, they are not a great blind pick because they need a good ADC to work with and can be hard countered by double range, which is why they are not in the S tier. Flying into S, we have Rakan. He's been OP since forever due to his high mobility and sustain. He does have bad matchups, but his kit is dynamic enough to outmaneuver most situations. Rakan can always find a way to be useful because his flash ult combo is undodgeable. It's actually crazy how he always has a 51 to 52% win rate every patch but doesn't get nerfed. Skarner got a lot of changes in 14.10 and he's just straight broken. He was played a bit in support after his rework, but I'm not sure if he's an actually viable support or it's just because Skarner is OP. Either way, he is currently very strong and is a great blind pick because he's a flex pick for jungle. Skarner's getting nerfed next patch, so we'll see very soon if he will still be a high tier support. I played a lot of Janna at the start of the split and it was honestly a pretty miserable meta for her, but 14.11 saved her. Her AP build died after nerfs to Shurelya's in 14.10 and her damage in 14.9. I think Janna is back to being really strong because of how well she can use Helia. Her new playstyle doesn't have as much agency as she used to, but it's strong in a different way. Janna counters most engaged champs, but even with having a hard time with hook and enchanter champs, she can still do very well. Seraphine support was always decent, but with the changes to first strike, I think she becomes one of the best supports. She can farm people with first strike on cooldown, and she's great with Helia, which are the two most OP things for the current support meta. Seraphine is also one of the best blind picks at the moment because she's strong in ADC as well, and her range can deal with a lot of traditional enchanter support counters. Nami got some really insane buffs in 14.11. As someone that played a lot of Nami last split, I feel like these buffs were unnecessary, but now she's very OP. Personally, I don't like Helia on Nami because I feel like she doesn't use it as well as it could be used and use the same build that I ran last split, which you can find on my latest Nami guide. Nami is one of the best blind picks as an enchanter because her kit can navigate through most matchups and scenarios. Blitzcrank got a pretty decent nerf in 14.9, but he is still very strong. I think Blitzcrank will always be high tier because he's able to stay relevant at all parts of the game even if he's behind. He counters all ranged champs and struggles against melee supports, but he just needs to land a hook on a carry to win a teamfight. The big reason why Blitz is so much better than not is because he can bring the enemy to him as opposed to throwing himself in the middle of a teamfight. Thresh is a champion that has it all but is gated by how hard he is to execute. If you are cracked at Thresh, you can make it seem impossible for the enemy team to play. His kit is designed to be one of the most versatile in the game where every ability can be used offensively or defensively. I think he is generally in a great state and you can never go wrong picking him blind because he can adapt to almost all situations. Rell didn't get any changes, but she feels super strong in the current meta. She has so much kill pressure in lane and playmaking outside of lane, making her one of the best champions to climb with. Rell can get countered by disengaged support champions, but if you play around her flash, you can get around that. She has always been good, but in the recent meta, she just feels so much better, and I think it might have to do with changes to Zeke's in Knight's Vow. At the top, we have Pyke. There's no other support champion that will snowball the game as hard as him. He has a feast or famine playstyle where he either 1v9s the game or is super useless. He's one of the hardest champions to play, but if you can play him well, he has a lot to offer. I think he's one of the best solo queue champs to climb with because he has a lot more agency than most of the support cast. That concludes my list. The meta is still very chaotic and unbalanced, so I'm sure we will have a lot of changes in the next patch. Thank you so much for watching.